Yeah, what Bishop just said is not all a lie. I never think about, oh yeah, somebody else is gonna read this for me when I call myself a vagabond. That sounds funny. Anyway, yeah, I'm deeply grateful to Laura for being ordained, which I guess is actually gratitude to the Holy Spirit. Yes. To Bishop Amy, to Deacon Susan, it's so lovely to be here, and many familiar faces, some from Wartburg Seminary, some from way back, like Tim Ealing from Wartburg Seminary from, holy crap, a long time ago. I had hair back when I was hanging out with him a little bit. And Peter Schmidt here, right, this cat that's new to the Synod, he was a colleague when Amy and I are in our first calls in Fargo, North Dakota. So it was lovely to see Peter, and please greet Vicki. I should have said that.
She'll be here tonight.
Oh, she will? Oh, lovely. Cool. Yeah, I grew up in the northwest Minnesota Synod in Roseau County, about 9 miles from the Canadian border, in a little town called Badger. But I did live in Hibbing in the mid-1970s. Yes, Hibbing. That's right. Yeah, so while I was pretty small back then, I do recall stories of the taconite industry crapping out while driving through the abandoned neighborhoods on the edge of Hibbing. I remember talk of Rudy Perpich and Kevin McHale and Robert Allen Zimmerman. That was fun. Okay. Yeah, and I want to extend full permission to you to nap as you need. Right? Fall theologicals, people come to, well, at least I did. I rarely went to a fall theological in order to hear the speaker. I went just to hang out with friends and colleagues, and which is not always the same thing. I went to hang out with friends and colleagues and have a handful of beers and relax a little bit. So yeah, if you need to nap, go ahead. But I do look forward to our conversation together over the next day and a half, and I think it'll be good fun. So I look forward to conversations that spin off of that. Indeed, I've been at Wartburg since 2006, serving on the faculty there, and am delighted to be, sorry to my former students who had me for preaching. I'm delighted to not be subjected to student sermons any longer. I know, I'm looking at you, Andy Barry.
You taught me everything I know.
I was going to say something when the bishop was introducing me. I'm like, I take no credit for anything that they say. Nothing will make you hate God, or yeah, I just said that, didn't I? Nothing will make you hate God more than teaching preaching. So, I did my time. I consider it purgatory. I'm now in good shape. Okay, so before digging into the textures of nationalism, and just the bishop in all, well, just reading what I gave her to read, told you what this session was going to be about, faith and something else. Forget that, it's changed. So, sorry about that. But before we dig into the textures of nationalism, I want to actually have you do something for me. Okay? And this might require your cell phone. Will you shut the light off? Yeah, I give everybody permission to nap. Okay, so there's a series of questions, and this could completely flop, right? But if if you've got an internet connection, right, you just scan the QR code with your phone. Is it pulling up for anybody?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes? Oh, damn. All right. Okay. And I have a couple questions for you to respond to. Okay? Okay. It'll just pop up there, I think, as you go. Ah, lovely. So, what 3 words describe your current feelings about ministry? If you're having trouble with the QR code, you can go to menti, menti.com, and pop in these numbers here. People still working at it? Okay. Can you see that well enough?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? All right. Challenging, exhausting, hopeful.
Yeah.
Right, so what this does, a word cloud like this does, is it privileges words that are entered more than one time. Or the more times the word is entered by you all, the bigger it gets. All right? So, yeah. Notice. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Somebody take a picture of it.
Yeah, I did.
I should be more technically tech savvy, I should be able to grab them, but anyway. 99 responses. Right? Lots of things on the edge, right? But challenging, exhausting, appear to be among the top 3. Okay? Alright? You got it? Okay. Okay, keep that open. Okay. Got more questions? Okay. How's that feel? Is it accurate? Yeah? Okay. Now, I'm going to switch us to the next question. If I can make it work. Sure. All right. Still coming. All right. Next question. Okay. Yes, keep going on your form. What are 3 words that describe the political climate in your community, parish, congregation? Poopy, I like that. All right. I noticed that nobody's put utopian. It appears like there are some contexts that are more conservative and some contexts that are more progressive. depending on the congregation. Not surprising, but worth noting. Intolerant, divided, polarized. Zero sum. I like that. I don't like it, but I think it's descriptive. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next one. All right. Which best describes your partisan affiliation? This is a helpful question, I think, so that it reminds us that we are not a monolith politically. Right? Everybody still going at this one? So I did time in the parish in eastern North Dakota. Started under Bishop Rick Foss, or Pastor Rick Foss, who served as bishop. And one of the things that I continue to value about Rick's disposition is that he would do a thing called a shy Lutheran ballot that would allow people, you remember this, Peter? Yeah, shy Lutheran ballot, where he would provide people an anonymous, quiet way to respond to things, because especially those of Northern European descent, particularly Scandinavian, emotionally constipated descent, might not want to ruffle anybody's feathers by being honest, and so, yeah. Okay, right? So, very good. Next one, right? Local partisan temperature, right? First one, nationalist rhetoric is shaping my community. Right? Sort of in the middle. Racism is on the rise. Right? Alright, has anybody driven past Nevis lately? Nevis. Yeah?
Uh-huh.
The Trump store?
Yeah.
Yeah. I stopped there yesterday. I'll come back to that later. Alright. Whoops. Oh, yeah. Oh, look at that. Okay, this is interesting. We disaggregate that average, right? Right? 14 respondents in the room, right? Have said that they strongly agree with people in my congregation are afraid about the future. Okay? All right, there's one more. All right. 3 words that express my hope are: reconstitution. Assume that's a reference to the committee. This thing is free, by the way. Like, if I were teaching confirmation on a regular basis, I'd be using Menti all the time, I think. shy Lutherans are really just junior high kids. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Resurrection, faith, Jesus, grace, Holy Spirit, right? It's that stuff we're supposed to be chewing on a regular basis. All right. Well, thank you for indulging me. Does everybody have a picture of that that wants a picture of that? I think I can capture these later and provide them if you want. Okay. Back to this. Okay. Right? So thank you for indulging me in taking a temperature of the gathering, so to speak. Right? Less so among you all, and more so among your parishioners or people in your community. It seems to me fear is playing a role, right? In what you are describing as significantly divided context, right? Polarized context. Some of which are progressive, your communities, some of which are conservative, right? In the room, we also have a spectrum of political persuasions, right? Albeit sort of loaded in the direction of the Democratic Party, right? It is not a monolith. Okay? So, all right. Against that backdrop, right? Let's get to the challenges of nationalism. Okay? So what, basically, what is nationalism? What did I do? All right. Right. So of course, being a seminary dork in an ivory tower, I'll go to the Latin right away. Nothing is sexier than Latin. Right? So the infinitive of nacer is nasi, right? From which we get the word nation, right? But it is to be born, to grow, to spring forth, to rise, right? And natio, the, hear it? Natio, right? Is the nation, the people, right? Birth. It is a race, right? And in Old Latin text, it's also the heathen, which I appreciate. If I have an affinity to anybody, it's the heathens. I find the heathens way more interesting some days than the Christians. Okay? So, right, this is our linguistic roots. Okay? When we think about the word nation, right, we're talking about those who have risen up, right, taking it a step further, who have risen up from the soil of a place. Right? Risen up from the soil of a place. So political philosopher Andrew Haywood, right, defines nationalism this way. Nationalism can be defined broadly as the belief that the nation is the central principle of political organization. As such, it is based on two core assumptions. First, humankind is naturally divided into distinct nations, and second, the nation is the most appropriate and perhaps only legitimate unit of political rule. Okay? So, the nation, right? The people, right? And I want you to hear in a certain way that the concept of nation is related, right? In terms of a Venn diagram, it's not a synonym for race, but it's overlapping, right? A specific people, right? In Greek, the word used is ethne, right? Sort of, right? Which translate as nation, right, or Gentile. But right, it's an ethnic affinity. Okay? So, note some core ideas here in Haywood's definition. In particular, the why behind the nation being the central organizing principle of political organization. It is natural. Right? You hear that? That was a pun. I'm trying to make this fun, man. This is political philosophy. Right? The why is it's natural. Right? From within a nationalist perspective, the nation is the natural, right? From natural order, the natural organizing principle. Right? That is, there is an appeal here to natural law, and therefore the doctrine of creation. The nation is central to God's ordering and preserving order on the planet. Perhaps going as far for the good of the people that make up the nation. Right? So what? Right? Why does any of this matter? Well, the ordering of the world, right, from chaos into order within a nationalist perspective is understood to be ordained by God in the fabric of creation. Right? A trajectory that flows from this notion of the nation as the proper unit of political order, because God created the world for this, is that there is no sense of any universal humanity. Right? There is no sense of universal humanity. Right? To quote political philosopher Andrew Vincent of Cardiff University in Wales, right? He says, each and every human being is particularized with their identity inseparable from the nation. Right? So it's a hyper-individualism that gains its corporate identity and corporate roots from the idea of nationhood. Right? Of nationhood. And just, I should have said this at the beginning. Jump in anytime. Feel free to object. Please don't shout unless I ask you to. Makes me nervous. Okay. So, let's go back to the French Revolution. Right? That's the same as saying, let's talk about Latin. Sexy. That's right. While not an unchallenged hypothesis, there is a measure of consensus among political philosophers and historians that the concept of nationalism really begins to have legs during the final decades of the 18th century. Right? So in the scope of cosmic history, this was like when I blinked a moment ago. Right? This is not an old concept in terms of a central concept. Okay? Yeah, not an old concept. The French Revolution, right, which ran the final decade, roughly, of the 18th century, has the people, is that okay? Oh, as long as you can still see the screen, yeah. All right, didn't want to wake anybody up. Right. Right, remember the story of the French Revolution, right? And if you need to get back to Les Miserables and start singing, you go right ahead. As long as you don't do so like Russell Crowe. Sorry, this is being recorded, I need to watch. All right. You never know when Russell Crowe's gonna tune into the Northeastern Minnesota Theocon. All right, anyway, right? Right, the French Revolution, right, this last decade of the 18th century saw the nation coalesce and the people, the French people, rise up against the tyranny of the elites. Right? That's a basic narrative thread that runs through the French Revolution, is that the people rise up against the elites. the monarchy and the aristocracy, right? Beheading a whole bunch of people, including Louis XVI, in favor of rule by the people, right? The people, right? The French people, okay? We all know, if you've hung out with French folks, right? Even Quebecois from north of the border, right? There is a pride of French nationalism, right? Which has, over the decades, squirted out sideways, not unlike it squirts out sideways in other places. Okay? While the American Revolution preceded the French, the rise of a liberal democracy with the people, right, or the nation, a bit more broadly defined than the American experiment suggests, that French soil, perhaps watered by the blood of the elites, served as a primary catalyst for the early rise of nationalist political ideology. Right? Now, there are scholars, and we'll come back to this in a bit, who would locate the origins of nationalism as early as the 14th century, and some would pin it upon the Protestant Reformation. I'm not too keen on that, but feel free, right? Even so, right, it is in the temporal vicinity of the year 1800 that the idea gained significant traction as a political ideology, ruled by the people, for the people, right? Or, as the French say, liberté, égalité, fraternité, ou la mort, right? Or liberty, equality, brotherhood, or death, right? Or death, right? It's an existential thing. This is not just sort of realpolitik where people govern themselves so that there's order and, you know, like the roads you and I drove on to get here had stripes and a dotted line down the middle so we knew not to run into each other, right? We're talking here about rule that has to do with the very existence of the individuals that are part of this collective of the nation. Okay? So, and now notice also, this will come back in a little bit, the red Phrygian cap, right? This thing, yeah? And the tricolored cockade, right? Symbolic of revolutionaries from the French Revolution. Yes, sir?
You had said that there's some people who believe that there's foundation in the Reformation. Why? Like, what is their reasoning for that?
The reasoning for that is sort of the decoupling of the Holy Roman Empire from complete imperial dominion over certain places, right? So when the Protestants, when we, right, broke free of the Holy Roman Empire and oversight by the Pope, they see that as the beginning of the nation state emerging. Okay? Yeah. Now, yeah. All right. So different nationalisms. Okay? I want to be as clear as possible here. That to say that something is nationalistic does not automatically mean Trumpism. Okay? They're not the same thing. Okay? So, in order to be, to abide by the 8th commandment, right? And try and be as clear as possible in our thinking about what nationalism is, right? It's good to dive into it, right? We could dive way deeper, but then it would be tomorrow and we'd be done. So we should talk about some other things too. But in the meantime, right? This is built on other people's work, right? But I would lump, sort of, or categorize two basic kinds of nationalism, right? The first would be civic or political nationalism, and the second would be cultural ethnic nationalism, right? if you want to, although I wouldn't recommend it, if you want to sort of fall into the binary of conservative and liberal, the civic nationalism would be more of a politically liberal nationalism. The cultural ethnic would be more of a conservative. And not just in the US, in other places as well. Right? So notice characteristics of civic and political nationalism, right? Political philosophy centered on liberal values, right? So what holds the nation together, right? And this is who's in and who's out is the question, right? What holds the nation together, what common identifying traits begins with political philosophy, right? In particular with liberal values. That is, I value healthcare, right? Or the common good, let's put it that way. The common good of all people, no matter what their background, is a value, right? Of a sort of liberal nationalism, right? The unifying glue that holds the nation together is not blood or ethnicity, but valued normative beliefs, there we go, right? So, right, I'll come back and compare these a little bit more. And this civic political nationalism is likely to be secular, okay? Not privileging any particular religious idea, okay? One could say that the US, right, at some point in time, albeit not in a perfect way, the American experiment was intended to be this kind of nationalism, right? And I want to problematize that statement, of course, because in our Constitution, right, we counted African Americans as 3/5 of a human being, right?
And
So
in
this
the
is
Declaration, they considered American Indians savages, so I'm
Yeah.
not really sure that we were ever wanting to land in the civic or political nationalism.
okay. Did y'all hear that?
No.
Say it louder.
So in the Constitution, there is the calculation. In the Constitution, there's the calculation for people of African descent, but in the Declaration, American Indian people were classified as savages. So I'm not 100% sure that I would say that it was ever to be a civic or political nationalism. There was othering from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly. But it was othering in a particular context, a historical context, right? And believe me, I'm not making an apology for either of those things, right? But the ideal, right, was some sort of civic or political nationalism. A problem with it was that white men with land were considered the heart of the nation, right?
Wouldn't that be cultural and ethnic though?
Well, yeah, we'll come to that, right? They wouldn't see it as such, right? Thomas Jefferson would not say, oh, this is an ethnic, cultural ethnic thing, right? Yeah, okay? All right, the second one, right, the cultural ethnic, right? This is a political philosophy rooted historically and centered by tradition, right? It looks for its authority and its formation to the past, okay? Its unifying glue, right, is cultural ethnic distinction. Sorry for the typo, right? And it's likely it has a sense of being ordained by God. Okay? So, it's not a perfect division between these two, and I don't want to suggest that there is a past in our country which is a state of pristine enactment of nationalism, right? I'm not making that argument. Let me be loud and clear, okay? Right? But, right? The idea here, right, to be as generous to people as possible, there is a possibility of nationalism without the measure of ethnicity, right, or cultural homogeneity. Okay. Okay. Now, again here, borrowing from Andrew Haywood. Okay. And he has a couple of diagrams that I want us to look at that have to do with tensions within nationalism, right? The civic and the ethno-cultural is how he talks about them, right? So, right, notice the difference, right? The civic nationalism is politically connected, right? That is in terms of its common ideas, as opposed to its commonality being cultural or historical, sort of the blood of the nation, homeland kind of idea, right? I think we should all cringe a little bit when we think about homeland security, right? Right? Civic nationalism can be more inclusive, right? If we are a nation of immigrants, right? As we, I don't know if anybody else grew up with the melting pot thing on Saturday morning cartoons. Anybody? There's lots of problems with that too, but anyway. Right? An idea of inclusion, right? Of welcoming. The Statue of Liberty serves as a symbol of this, right? Ethnocultural nationalism, right, is about exclusion, right? You can't become a part of a nation unless the blood runs through your veins, sort of idea that you heard of it. Right? So universalism versus particularism. Equal nations versus unique nations, right? How does the nationalist think about foreign policy? Well, are we one nation among others, or are we the city on the hill? Rational principled versus mystical emotional. National sovereignty versus national spirit. Voluntaristic versus organic, based on citizenship, based on descent. Civic loyalty versus ethnic allegiance. Cultural diversity versus cultural unity. Okay? So political theorists, right, note this continuum. Right? I don't call it a continuum rather than a binary choice. Okay? Right? Another way to think about this, right, is in terms of liberal nationalism versus expansionist nationalism, right? And think here about, were the Nazis nationalists? Right? Yes. Okay, hold that thought just for a moment. Okay. So here we have, right, these tensions, right? National self-determination versus national chauvinism, right? There's a great episode of Faulty Towers about Germans. Anybody like Faulty Towers? Yeah, well, I would have thought Andy Barry was like it. Okay. Anyway, that was a brain fart, sorry. Okay. Right? Inclusivity versus exclusivity, voluntaristic versus organic, progressive versus reactionary, rational and principled versus emotional instinctive, human rights versus national interest, right? You can cancel out another person's human rights if it's in the national interest, if it's in the interest of purity. Okay? Equal nations versus a hierarchy of nations, constitutionalism versus authoritarianism, right? Ethnic cultural pluralism versus ethnic cultural purity, cosmopolitanism versus imperialism, collective security versus power politics, supranationalism versus international anarchy. Okay. Okay, now, when we use the word nationalism, right, it gets thrown around a lot without much precise definition. Okay? And I want to suggest that when we're thinking about it, I'm a political independent, right? I have been a Republican, I've been a Democrat, cards for both of them somewhere in my house. I don't like either one, right? I'm just cranky. Right? But I want to suggest that within the Republican Party, right, and here trying to be as generous along the lines of the Eighth Commandment as possible, right, you have a continuum of liberal nationalism, they would hate that, liberal nationalism and expansionalist nationalism, right? Same as the other, right? Civic nationalism and ethnocultural nationalism, okay? When we think about, all right, well, what are the Democrats then? Right? Anybody? Potentially. Right? And there's a globalist sort of notion within sort of the Democratic Party. Right? I'll just throw that out there and let it sit like a fart in church. All right. So, all right. From a phenomenological vantage point, say that fast. From a phenomenological vantage point, right? Nationalisms demonstrate a shared concern for preserving or renewing the identity of the nation, right? It's an identity issue, right? If you feel like, no matter who you are, no matter what your political persuasion, if you feel like your identity is in crisis or being attacked, how do you react?
Defensive mode.
Yeah, right, you're getting a defensive mode, right? You might feel miserable and say, screw this, and just walk away, or you might put up your dukes, right? I never imagined saying that in public. Right, put up your dukes, okay? Right. Also, there's a shared will to reclaim or preserve the nation's right to self-determination, right? And we're thinking here, right, when I use the word nation here, I'm not talking about the United States of America. I'm talking about the nation within the nation, if you will. Okay? And also, right, there's a shared narrative that makes sense of the world, often including a glorious origin and a glorious future. Right? The shared narrative I want you to remember. Right?
So where is that shared narrative anymore?
Oh, we're getting there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe. I will see. This could completely crap out. I don't know. But anyway, yes, we're getting there, I think. Right? So, right, this idea of narrative, right, sort of tips my hat towards where I want to focus, right, moving forward. And that is in terms of ideology, right? Perhaps if we think about this challenge, right, the challenge of nationalism and other challenges, right, in terms of ideology, it can be helpful for us in terms of thinking about how we are the church in a challenging time such as this. Polarized, as you all said. Okay? So, from the vantage point of ideology, nationalisms focus on cultivating, enlivening, and enmeshing the identity of the individual with the identity of the nation. Right? What does it mean to be an American? Right? If you had a time machine, you wouldn't be here. That was funny to me. Right? If you had a time machine, or just some sort of light rail that, you know, ran like the communists over in China, that you get around the nation quickly. That was a joke too in my head. Anyway, right? You could go around and ask people of different backgrounds, right? Different religions, right? No religion, and say to them, what does it mean to be an American? Right? Just think about perhaps your grandparents or yourself. What does it mean to be an American? Anybody? Sturts?
Land of the free, home of the brave.
Okay. Land of the free, home of the brave. Yeah, Casa.
I always question when I hear that term American, are you talking about the US, you talking about from Canada, you talking about Mexico, Central America, South America?
Right. That's a great question. Extremely elitist. I can pick on him maybe.
We're number one.
We're number one. Okay. Let me just push it, right? Because, yeah, I'm trying to think of how to say this. So, what does it mean to you to be an American? Can I just say the question differently? Right? What does it mean to be an American? Right? Yeah.
When I think about my family of origin, it means immigrants, rural, farming, hardworking, of the land.
Okay. Right? Immigrants, farming, hardworking of the land.
Opportunity.
Opportunity. Okay? Yeah.
For me today, I'm not sure.
Okay?
I'm really not sure what it means to be an American anymore.
Okay? Over there, so. Ben?
Haunted by the idea of the frontier, and maybe the idea of the plantation.
Haunted by the frontier or the idea of the plantation?
If you lived in another country, which like in Mexico, when I was little, we were not looked at as anything to look up to. We were oppressive.
Yeah.
We were, I was Lutheran, so I was the wrong religion, I was the wrong color, I was the wrong faith, spoke the language not well,
Right.
you know, so there's a difference. When I lived in London for a short time, we were looked at as drinking, gun-toting, and other things.
Right.
Very sexual things. That was like in college. And I'm like, those were not any of the things that I was at the time. So it's interesting when you go elsewhere, how they see Americans.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I had an opposite experience in a different country also where I grew up. And for me, in that situation, America was seen as a beacon of light of what people could be as independent people.
Can you all hear?
I kind of finished.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have got it over here, sorry.
No, it's just a different perspective, where I grew up. America was seen as a beacon of light of what you could be when you were independent, you know, to be free.
Emulate? Reiterate.
You were what people wanted to emulate. They wanted
Yeah.
to be like. When I was in Mexico, it was much different. I was really young, but I wasn't from there. So it was more of a feeling that the Americans were trying to take over Mexico and trying to take over them and use them rather than work with them. So that's what I got out of it. And then I wasn't like the right color, I wasn't the right religion, I didn't know the language till later. But yeah, it was a different perspective. So when I came back to the United States, I thought I'd be friends with people who weren't from my country and inviting and welcoming and loving, so that people who were on the outside felt like they were on the inside.
One more.
I'm glad you asked, because I haven't given it much thought lately.
Yeah.
To be American, to me, today, feels like being complicit in things that prioritize whiteness, maleness, Christianity, heteronormativeness, things like that.
We don't need that. Sorry. Would it be too much of a stretch to say that there's an edge of shame
Absolutely.
in what you're talking about?
Not a stretch at all.
Yeah.
I feel, as I'm thinking about.
Shout it out, man.
I feel like we're stuck in the past that didn't exist. Like, as someone young who's like inheriting this, like, there's a whole lot that wasn't that great about the '50s, but everybody thinks it does, and we face that problem in the church and in our politics and everywhere else, and like, we're stuck in something that didn't actually exist. I'm carrying it around.
Yeah.
I think we're obsessed with competition, to be the best in the world and constantly trying to justify, our role as a world leader.
Okay.
It's that obsession with competition that, again, we're number one. We have to do number one in the Olympics, we have to have the World Series. You know, if our soccer team loses at the World Cup, it's a national disaster. Yeah, and economically, we've got, you know, and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, competition, yes. All right, we're rolling now. You already talked.
I know, but I'll say it quick. So I was recently in Iceland visiting Iceland, and Iceland's a very lovely country, very blunt though. And so they'd be like, "Oh, where are you coming from?" And we speak English, and I'd say, "Oh, America," and there'd be the Scandinavian kind of, "Oh, okay, all right," and then like a face like, and I was like, "We're not that kind of American," you know. And it's like a weird defense mechanism, you know. And a lot of people were nice, but they were still very honest. So anyway.
Okay, one more.
I'm concerned, you know, I'm worried, I'm confused, I look at the country, I look at, you know, what's happening to our country, I keep hearing woke is bad, and, you know, not being woke is good, and I'm just really concerned about the country, and so it's hard to know which kind of American am I, you know? Am I the Minnesota American, or the Florida American, or the Texas American, or, you know, it seems like we're so fractured that there is no one American anymore.
Okay, this is illustrative, right? If you ask, just ponder. If you ask the people in your congregation, what does it mean to be American? Right? Assuming you listen to them with all sincerity and charity in the 8th commandment, right? Would they say different things? Right? I'm thinking especially in terms of more conservative places. Yes.
First of all, I probably wouldn't dare to ask.
Okay.
Because it could erupt.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to manage that eruption.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep moving, sorry.
It means to be white and patriotic.
Yeah. I would guess they wouldn't say it means to be white, but it's not that it's not true.
That's how I would define it.
Yeah. You gonna say something? Okay, all right, good. My goal was to piss people off this week. Yeah. Right, okay, so, I mean, one might think about this in terms of a crisis of identity, right? It is the polarization, right, is not just a friendly disagreement, right? It has to do with existence. It has to do with identity. Okay? So, ideology focuses on declaring and ritualizing the righteousness of the nation, especially over and above other nations. Right? The nationalism as an ideology, right, behaves in a religious way. Right? And as with any ideology, right, if you are ascribed to the ideology, you are by definition righteous, If you do not ascribe to the ideology, you are unrighteous. Right? You think about both the congregations that I sort of call home congregations, one in Badger, Minnesota, and the other one in Holly, Minnesota. Both left the ELCA and voted to leave, right? And as you all know, right, whenever that vote happened, even if it didn't meet the threshold of leaving, right, you have the righteous and the unrighteous in the wake of the disaster, right? 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 And, right, there's also a norming of the nation's narrative with the ideology, right? The stories we tell, right? Picking on Ben Stewart, right? You talked about plantations and what was the other one? The frontier, right? The myth of the frontier and sort of this idea of the plantation floating in the background, right? The shame, right? That many people identify, right? When I stopped at the Trump store yesterday, right? And I encourage you to do so. Although just be aware, those of you who identify as liberals, that on the door it says, beware, we don't play nicely with liberals. Okay? So it's, I don't know, it was creepy as hell. Sorry to Trump supporters in the room, but it was creepy. And I'll show you some pictures of it perhaps later. But, oh, there were buttons, right? And it was CRT with there's a red circle and a slash through it. And I honestly didn't know what in the hell I was talking about. So I got out to the car and Googled it, and it's critical race theory, right? So, right, the idea of looking at the history of America's history of slavery, right? And its disgusting residue that continues, right? Is not part of the narrative, right? That can't be part of the narrative if the nation is to be glorious. Right? Racism actually cannot be part of the narrative. Okay? So, right. So I want to shift us to 10:15. Yeah. I want to shift us to thinking about specifically nationalism as ideology. Okay. Nationalism as ideology. Okay. A couple things to consider, right, about ideology. Right. We all operate with an ideology, or probably ideologies. Okay? While Marx and Engels thought that they had crossed over the line into a post-ideological time, they clearly didn't look in the mirror very carefully or listen to themselves, because they too operated out of an ideology. It's just human, I think, right? And therefore, when we think about ideology, right, we need to be clear about how close ideology is to worldview. Right? If the worldview is the structure of the world as we project it, right? And while it might match with what's actually out there, right? We live in a worldview. Right? We live in an ideology of what's right and wrong, right? And all of the stories that go with that. Okay? And right? And again, right? Ideology just naturally demarcates between right and wrong, between good and bad, between who's in and who's out, between the enlightened and the troglodyte. How about that? Okay. So, I want to show you a short clip from a movie that I'm guessing nobody in here has seen. Right? They Live. Anybody? Oh, all right, we got one nerd. Okay, good. They Live, right? And it stars none other than Rowdy Piper.
That's fist fighting all movie then.
Yes. Okay. From 1988, okay? And I didn't come up with this idea. I'm borrowing this from Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who, if you really want an interesting read that's a bugger to get through, check out his book called The Sublime Object of Ideology. But, yeah, so, all right, here's Rowdy Roddy. I bet you didn't think you were gonna get Rowdy Roddy Piper.
I did not.
Okay, so the deal is here is that his sunglasses are magical, right? Or have powers, right? To see things as they are, as opposed to the way they're projected to be. Okay?
What's your problem? I said, what's your problem?
Orange Day, sir. Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, sir. Here you go, sir. Thank you. Hey, buddy. You gonna pay for that or what? Look, buddy, I don't want no house today. Either pay for it or put it back.
Okay. Great movie. I don't know if I'd go that far. Right, I forgot to mention it's a sci-fi movie. And the glasses don't only reveal the subliminal messages, the sublime, they also reveal the aliens among us who are running things. Yeah. Yeah, right? Presumably these lenses do more than block harmful UV rays. They unmask the everyday world, unmask the ideologies of the everyday world, right? The messages around us, the story around us and healing. Okay? So, one of nationalism's features, not unique to but distinctive of nationalism, of course, is the norming narrative that that conforms to the ideology. Right? If America is the greatest nation on the planet, you have to norm the narrative to that. And do you know what doesn't match with such a narrative? History. Yes. All right. History. Slavery. Right? Race relations in this country. Okay? So, we all live, right? This is, I think, an important point, and then I'll stop for the break. Yeah? We all live within narratives. Right? Narratives organize our world. As Christians, right, we live within the narrative of the triune God's trustworthiness, where all of time is held in the presence of the triune God. Right? Now, we are also formed by other stories, dissonant stories. Right? I play bagpipes, and there are narratives within the bagpiping community about what it means to be a bagpiper, right? That are quite fascinating, and they're completely outside of reality, right? But we live within them, right? Now, let me be clear. If we all live within narratives, right? If we all live within an ideology or ideologies, right? Each one of these ideologies shapes our existence. How we understand who we are, how we understand who other people are, how we understand time and community. In many ways, the narratives in which we live assemble the world for us. The narratives in which we live assemble the world for us. Okay? So, let's stop there, and when we come back, move into an example of how the nationalist narrative in the States is perpetuated. So, thank you. And this image, I should say, the bishop mentioned it's kind of faded. Do you see what it is? Yes. Barbed wire and the American flag. Yeah. So, in 2016, right, one of the joys of living in Dubuque, Iowa, is that it's like a center point for presidential candidates, right, in the primaries, so you can go hang out with anybody. And so one day my wife and I went to see Bernie Sanders, which was funky, and really like a big beer party. And my wife went to see Hillary Clinton, took our daughter, and that was a very tiny rally at the time. This was before the Iowa caucuses, right? And the day after both Clinton and Sanders were there, I went out to the Trump rally just to see what was going on. And I took my camera, so I was an amateur photojournalist. And as I was pondering what was being said and what was going on, what I was seeing, I just turned and saw the flag through the barbed wire and it struck me that this was a vision of the Trump presidency. So, that's what I called this thing. This is a vision of the Trump presidency from late January, early February of 2016. All right, break time.
Before you get up